The bitter wind of December 1872 howled across the Dakota Territory, like the breath of death itself, carrying snowflakes that stung like bullets against any exposed skin. Through the blizzard's fury, Captain William Morrison led his cavalry patrol toward the isolated Harper homestead, his scarred face marked by a jagged line from his left temple to his jaw set in grim determination. Inside the modest cabin, 10-year-old Emma Harper knelt beside the fireplace, carefully copying letters from her father's surveying journal. The candlelight caught the golden strands of her hair as she concentrated, her small tongue poking out in concentration. Her mother, Sarah, hummed softly while mending a torn shirt. The domestic seemed peaceful despite the storm raging outside. John Harper hunched over his desk in the corner, his weathered hands tracing lines across detailed maps. For weeks, he had been documenting something that made his jaw clench with anger: illegal land transactions that would rob the Lakota of their sacred territories. His friend William Morrison had initially seemed supportive when John shared his concerns, but recent conversations had grown tense, even threatening. "Emma," Sarah called softly, "help me with supper. Your father's been working all day." Emma set down her pencil and moved toward the kitchen area, but froze when shadows appeared outside the frost-covered windows. "Mama, there are men outside." John Harper's head snapped up from his maps. Through the window, he saw the blue uniforms of cavalry soldiers surrounding his home. At their head stood Morrison, but something in his former friend's posture sent ice through John's veins. "Sarah, take Emma to the root cellar," John whispered urgently, reaching for his rifle. The front door exploded inward before they could move. Morrison stepped through the splintered wood, his service revolver drawn, followed by 6 heavily armed soldiers. "Hello, John," Morrison said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of betrayal. "I told you to drop this investigation." Emma pressed herself against her mother's skirt, her green eyes wide with terror, as she stared at the scarred face of the man who had shared countless meals at their table. "William, please." John said, his hands raised but inching toward his hidden strongbox. "We can discuss this. You don't have to." Morrison's first bullet caught John Harper in the chest, spinning him backward. Sarah's scream pierced the air before Morrison's second shot silenced her forever. Emma stood frozen in absolute horror, watching her parents' blood spread across the wooden floor she had swept that very morning. The man she had called Uncle William holstered his smoking pistol with practiced efficiency. "Search everything," Morrison commanded his men. "Find Harper's documents and burn them. Leave nothing that could expose our arrangement with the railroad." Emma remained motionless, her mind struggling to process the nightmare unfolding before her. She watched Morrison's men ransack her home, destroying everything her family had built. When one soldier overturned her father's desk, papers scattered across the floor, and Emma glimpsed something that would burn itself into her memory. A partially hidden letter in her father's handwriting, addressed to the territorial governor. The storm intensified outside, and through the chaos, Emma noticed the back door standing slightly ajar from the wind. With the soldiers focused on their destruction, she crept backward step by agonizing step until she could slip outside into the blizzard. The cold hit her like a physical blow, but terror kept her moving. She crawled behind the woodpile, her body shaking uncontrollably as she heard Morrison's voice inside her ruined home. "Make it look like an Indian attack," he ordered. "Scatter some arrows around, make it messy. The railroad needs this land clear of complications." Emma hugged her knees to her chest, tears freezing on her cheeks as she realized that her parents hadn't died in some random act of violence. They had been murdered by a man they trusted, a man whose greed valued land more than human life. When the soldiers finally departed, their hoofbeats fading into the storm, Emma crawled back toward her home on hands and knees. She found her parents' bodies growing cold by the dying fire, their faces peaceful despite the violence of their deaths. "I'm sorry, Papa," she whispered, kissing his forehead. "I'm sorry, Mama." In her father's clenched fist, she found what Morrison's men had missed, a small brass key that John Harper had grabbed in his final moments. Emma recognized it immediately, the key to her father's secret compartment in the barn, where he kept his most important documents. With numb fingers, she retrieved the hidden papers, copies of surveys, correspondence with railroad executives, and most damning of all, a detailed letter documenting Morrison's conspiracy. Her father had suspected betrayal and prepared accordingly. Emma tucked the documents inside her coat and looked around the destroyed cabin one final time. She was alone now, with winter closing in and nowhere to go. But as she stepped into the blizzard, she carried something more valuable than to shelter the truth about her parents' murder. The storm swallowed her small figure as she stumbled away from the only home she had ever known. Driven by desperation and the burning need for justice. 3 miles from the Harper homestead, Chief Standing Bear of the Lakota felt the vision's pull like a physical force. The 63-year-old leader had learned to trust such spiritual callings, and this one came with unusual urgency, a child in desperate need brought to them by forces beyond understanding. "Gather 4 riders," he told his son-in-law Gray Fox. "Someone needs our help." Gray Fox, a seasoned warrior of 28, never questioned his chief's intuitions. They had saved the tribe too many times to doubt. The storm grows worse. Should we wait for morning? A child may not survive until morning. They found Emma Harper collapsed in a snowdrift, her lips blue with cold, but her small fist still clutching the precious documents. Standing, Bear dismounted and gently lifted the unconscious girl, noting the determination still etched on her young face, even in unconsciousness. "She has traveled far in this storm," observed Gray Fox. "What drives a child to such desperation?" Standing Bear studied Emma's face, seeing strength beneath the fragility. "We will learn her story when she is ready to tell it." The ride to the winter camp took 4 hours through treacherous terrain. Emma drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling about scarred faces and burning documents. Standing, Bear listened carefully, filing away every detail for future consideration. The Lakota winter camp nestled in a protected valley, 23 lodges arranged in the traditional sacred circle. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and despite the harsh season, the sounds of daily life continued: children playing, women working, warriors maintaining their weapons. When Standing Bear arrived, carrying the white child, conversations stopped mid-sentence. The tensions between whites and Lakota had grown dangerously high, and many in the tribe questioned the wisdom of involvement with any white settlers. Morning Star emerged from her lodge, her 31-year-old face bearing the particular sorrow of a mother who had lost her child. 6 months earlier, smallpox had claimed her son, and the grief had hollowed her from within. Her husband had died in battle 2 years prior, leaving her alone with her pain. "Father," she said quietly, "what have you brought us?" "A child with no family. Her parents are dead, killed by white soldiers." Morning Star studied Emma's pale features, so different from her lost son's bronze skin and dark hair. Something in the girl's face stirred memories of her own child's vulnerability. "Bring her inside," Morning Star said finally. "She will freeze in this wind." Over the following days, Emma slowly recovered under Morning Star's careful tending. The tribal healer Grandmother Willow treated her frostbite with herbal remedies while teaching her basic Lakota words. Emma proved remarkably quick to learn her young mind, absorbing the new language with desperate intensity. When Emma finally spoke of her parents' murder, Standing Bear listened with growing concern. The description of the scarred soldier matched reports from other tribes about a particular cavalry officer who seemed unusually interested in tribal lands near railroad routes. "What do we call her?" asked Red Hawk, Morning Star's younger brother, a fierce warrior of 25, whose hot blood often overruled his judgment. Standing Bear considered carefully. "She survived what would kill grown men, and she carries important secrets. We will call her Little Wolf for her courage and cunning." By spring 1873, Emma had found her place within the tribe's rhythm. She helped Morning Star with domestic tasks, learned to ride from Gray Fox, and absorbed the oral traditions shared by Grandmother Willow. The other children gradually accepted her, though some older tribe members remained suspicious of the white outsider. But Emma's integration came at a price. Government restrictions tightened around the reservation, and railroad surveyors appeared with increasing frequency near traditional hunting grounds. The documents she had saved from her father's cabin painted a clear picture of the forces arrayed against the Lakota Morrison's conspiracy, was just one part of a larger pattern of land theft and cultural destruction. 2 years passed. By 1875, 15-year-old Emma Little Wolf, to her adopted family, had grown tall and strong. Her blonde hair now bore traditional braids, decorated with earned feathers, and she could track game, prepare food, and speak Lakota as fluently as English. More importantly, she had found genuine love and acceptance within Morning Star's lodge. "Tell me about the old days," Emma would ask during evening story circles. Standing Bear would speak of vast buffalo herds, of sacred ceremonies under star-filled skies, of a time when his people rode free across lands that stretched beyond imagination. But always, the stories carried warnings about the changing world, about men who saw sacred places as mere property. "Why do they want our land so badly?" Emma asked one evening. "Because they believe in ownership rather than belonging," Standing Bear replied. "They see Mother Earth as something to possess, not as a relative to honor." Emma nodded, understanding the fundamental difference between her birth culture's hunger for acquisition and her adopted family's reverence for the natural world. She belonged here now, as surely as if she had been born Lakota. Unknown to the peaceful tribe, Captain William Morrison, now promoted to major, was studying intelligence reports in his territorial headquarters. One name kept appearing in dispatches from informants, a white girl living among the Lakota. A girl who might possess dangerous knowledge about certain unresolved incidents. Morrison traced his scar with one finger, a habit that surfaced whenever he contemplated violence. His illegal land deals with railroad companies had made him wealthy, but they depended on eliminating witnesses and complications. The Harper family should have been permanently silenced, but loose ends had a way of unraveling even the most careful plans. The morning of June 15, 1875, began peacefully in the Lakota camp. Emma helped Morning Star prepare breakfast while children played with carved toys and warriors tended their horses. The successful spring hunt had filled their cache pits, and winter preparations were already underway. Then the lookout's warning cries shattered the tranquility. A column of cavalry approached under the bright summer sun, and their blue uniforms stark against golden grassland. At their head rode Major Morrison, his scarred face grim with purpose, and his eyes scanning the camp with predatory intensity. Standing Bear emerged from his lodge wearing ceremonial dress, a calculated display of dignity and authority. Morning Star and the other women quietly gathered their children, while warriors formed a protective semicircle behind their chief. Morrison dismounted precisely 20 paces away, close enough to project authority, but far enough to avoid appearing immediately threatening. His gray eyes swept the camp methodically, searching for one particular face, our chief Standing Bear. Morrison began his voice, carrying clearly in the still air. "I come on official business from the territorial government. State your business." Standing Bear replied in English, his tone neutral, but his posture conveying strength. 3 years ago, a white family was massacred by hostile Indians near this territory. Morrison said, delivering his prepared narrative. "A young girl was taken from the scene. That child belongs with her own people. No Indians killed the Harper family." Standing Bear interrupted, his voice cutting like steel. "White soldiers murdered them. I found the girl myself nearly dead from cold and grief." Morrison's jaw tightened, but he pressed forward. "A white child was kidnapped and has been held against her will by this tribe. The territorial government demands her immediate return." Emma emerged from behind Morning Star, and Morrison's breath caught. The blonde 10-year-old, he remembered, had grown into a striking teenager, her hair braided with traditional ornaments, her green eyes steady and unafraid. But those eyes showed no recognition when they looked at him, at least not yet. "I am Major Morrison," he said, studying Emma's face carefully. "I've come to take you home to your people." Emma stepped closer to Morning Star, whose protective arm encircled her shoulders. "This is my home," she replied in clear English with Lakota inflection. "These are my people." Morrison felt relief mixed with frustration. The girl didn't remember him, but she remained a potential threat as long as she lived. "The United States government demands your return. You are an American citizen, not a ward of hostile savages." "My daughter goes nowhere," Standing Bear declared with quiet finality. "She came to us seeking refuge from white man's violence. She stays as long as she chooses." "This isn't a request." Morrison's voice hardened. "It's a direct order. The girl comes with me today, or there will be severe consequences for this entire tribe." The tension in the camp escalated dangerously. Emma could feel barely controlled anger radiating from Red Hawk and the other young warriors. Morning Star's grip on her shoulder tightened protectively. "What consequences?" Standing Bear asked quietly. Morrison's smile held no warmth. "Winter rations could be delayed indefinitely. Travel permits could be revoked. Government inspectors might discover treaty violations requiring immediate correction. The railroad companies have filed complaints about tribal interference with lawful surveys. The threat was crystal clear: submit or face starvation and imprisonment." Standing Bear had navigated such ultimatums before, but this felt different, more personal, and infinitely more dangerous. "I must consult with my tribal council," Standing Bear said finally. "You have 7 days," Morrison replied curtly. "On the 8th day, I return for the girl. If she's not ready to leave peacefully, I'll take her by force and deal with any resistance accordingly." As the cavalry departed, Emma watched Morrison's profile and felt something stir in her memory. A flicker of recognition she couldn't quite grasp, like trying to remember a nightmare upon waking. The tribal council convened that evening in Standing Bear's lodge, the sacred pipe passing from hand to hand as each member spoke their heart. The discussion grew heated as night deepened. "We cannot fight the entire U.S. Army," cautioned Gray Fox, always the strategist. "Morrison commands more soldiers than we have people. And we die free rather than live as slaves." Red Hawk countered, his young blood running hot with defiance. "They take our land, our buffalo, our sacred places. Where does surrender end?" White Elk, an elder whose 70 years commanded respect, spoke slowly. "The girl is precious to us all, but we cannot protect her from the soldiers' wrath. She is Lakota." Morning Star said fiercely, "Would you trade our daughter to save yourselves? Fear, we would save everyone." White Elk replied gently, including her. Emma sat outside the lodge, her ear pressed to the hide wall, listening to her fate being debated. The weight of responsibility crushed down on her shoulders. She had already cost one family their lives. She couldn't bear to destroy another. Quietly, she slipped away into the darkness. Morning Star found her an hour later at the stream where they often gathered water. Emma sat on a fallen log, knees drawn to her chest, staring at star-reflected water. "Running won't solve anything, little wolf," Morning Star said gently, settling beside her. "I bring death to everyone who protects me," Emma whispered. "My parents died because of what they knew. Now Morrison wants to hurt all of you because of me." Morning Star turned Emma's face toward her own dark eyes, blazing with maternal fierceness. "Listen carefully, daughter of my heart. Your parents died because evil men chose murder. We face danger because evil men choose threats. You didn't cause this. You're the reason we choose to fight. But if I go with him, if you go with him, you die. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but that man will kill you when your usefulness ends. We've lost too much to lose you too." Emma leaned into Morning Star's embrace, drawing strength from the woman who had become her true mother. What do we do? We survive, together. The next morning brought disturbing news. Red Hawk and 6 young warriors had vanished during the night, along with their fastest horses and best weapons. Foolish boys. Standing Bear muttered, but Emma heard pride mixed with worry in his voice. They learned the truth. When Morrison's aide arrived, under a flag of truce, his face flushed with anger. Your warriors attacked our supply convoy and stole government property. Major Morrison demands immediate return of the stolen horses and surrender of the perpetrators. Standing Bear maintained perfect composure. Young men sometimes make poor choices when they feel cornered. What exactly was taken? 12 cavalry horses, military supplies, and classified documents. The Major's patience is exhausted. You now have 5 days remaining, and any further provocation will result in immediate military action. After the messenger departed, Standing Bear found Emma practicing with the bow Gray Fox had crafted for her. Her accuracy had improved dramatically over 2 years, and she could consistently hit man-sized targets at 60 paces. Little wolf, he said quietly, there's something you should know about Major Morrison. Emma lowered her bow. What about him? The spirits sometimes show us truth in unexpected ways. The soldier who killed your parents, what do you remember about his appearance? Emma concentrated, trying to recall details from that horrific night. He was tall with gray eyes, and he had a scar on his face, a long scar from here to here. She traced a line from her temple to her jaw. Standing Bear nodded grimly. The same scar Morrison bears. Emma's blood turned to ice. You think he... I think the spirits brought you to us for a purpose that isn't yet fulfilled. That night, Emma's dreams were haunted by fragmented memories. Her father bent over maps, heated arguments between her parents, Morrison visiting their home in the weeks before the massacre, always asking questions about her father's surveying work. She woke with tears on her cheeks and terrible certainty growing in her heart. Morrison's pressure campaign intensified over the following days. Government supply wagons developed mechanical problems before reaching the reservation. Territorial agents arrived to inspect treaty compliance, finding numerous invented violations. Most ominously, cavalry patrols began circling the valley at dawn and dusk, a constant reminder of military presence just beyond the hills. The tribal council reconvened, and this time, divisions ran deeper. Half the tribe favored negotiation, seeking compromise that might preserve their safety. The other half, led by Red Hawk's supporters, advocated armed resistance despite hopeless odds. We're not cowards, declared Swift Arrow, a warrior whose scars told stories of previous battles. But we're not fools. Morrison has 200 soldiers. We have 36 fighting men. Numbers mean nothing when you fight for your children. Morning Star shot back. How many of you remember Wounded Knee? How many swore never again? Emma listened from her place beside Grandmother Willow, emotions churning. The old woman's weathered hand found hers and squeezed gently. Colasta Grandmother Willow whispered, sometimes the spirits work through us in ways we don't expect. What does your heart tell you about this, Morrison? Emma closed her eyes, trying to recall every detail of that terrible night. Morrison's voice, his mannerisms, the way he moved through her family's home, as if familiar with its layout. Grandmother, she whispered back, I think the man who wants me now is the same man who killed my birth parents. The old woman's eyes widened with understanding. Then perhaps you were brought here to see justice done. That night, fierce storms rolled across the plains, driving rain and hail against lodge walls with supernatural fury. Emma lay awake listening to thunder, and in her dreams, she saw herself returning to her family's cabin, searching for something hidden that Morrison's men had missed. She woke before dawn with absolute clarity about what she needed to do. The Harper homestead ruins lay exactly where memory placed them, though 3 years of weather had reduced the structure to scattered timber and weeds. Emma approached the site with her heart hammering, half expecting to see her parents' ghosts in the morning mist. She had told Morningstar she was gathering medicinal herbs, but her real destination was the barn where her father had kept his secret compartment. If Morrison had missed documents there, they might contain evidence that could destroy him. The barn's roof had partially collapsed, but the heavy timber construction had protected the interior. Emma used her father's brass key to open the hidden compartment behind what looked like a normal wallboard. Inside, she found exactly what she hoped for: complete copies of her father's correspondence with territorial officials, detailed maps showing illegal land transfers, and most damning of all, a letter addressed to the governor that named Morrison as the architect of a massive conspiracy. But as she read her father's careful documentation, Emma discovered something that made her blood run cold. Morrison hadn't simply been corrupt. He had been her father's trusted friend and confidant, someone John Harper had shared his concerns with before understanding the depth of betrayal. The final entry in her father's journal was dated the day before their murder. "I made a terrible mistake trusting William Morrison with my discoveries. His violent reaction when I suggested involving federal authorities convinces me he's not merely complicit, but the primary architect of this land theft scheme. I fear he may take drastic action to silence us. I've prepared copies of all evidence and hidden them where Sarah knows to find them if something happens to me." Emma clutched the documents to her chest as full understanding crashed over her. Morrison had murdered his friend's entire family to protect his criminal empire, and now he was using government authority to finish what he started. She carefully rewrapped the documents in oiled leather and prepared to return to camp, but froze when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Through gaps in the barn's broken walls, she saw Morrison himself riding up with two men in civilian clothes, hired guns, not soldiers. Emma pressed herself against the wall, hardly daring to breathe, as Morrison dismounted near the cabin ruins. "This is where it started," Morrison said to his companions. "Harper was getting too close to the truth, so I had to act decisively." "What about the girl?" asked one of the gunmen. "You sure she doesn't remember anything?" Morrison spat in the dirt. "She was 10 years old and traumatized. But she's the only living witness, and witnesses have a way of remembering inconvenient details at inconvenient times. So we eliminate her after I retrieve any documents she might have found." Harper was methodical. He definitely made copies of his evidence. The girl probably knows where they're hidden. Emma's heart pounded as she realized Morrison wasn't just planning to kill her, he intended to torture information from her first. She waited until the men moved toward the cabin ruins, then slipped out the barn's back entrance and ran for her horse. She had ridden halfway back to camp when another terrible realization struck her. If Morrison was here at the homestead ruins, who was watching the tribal territory? Had this been a distraction while other forces moved into position? Emma pushed her horse harder, racing against time and growing dread. She arrived at camp to find chaos. Red Hawk and his warriors had returned bloodied but victorious from another raid on Morrison's supply lines, but their success had triggered immediate retaliation. Cavalry units were moving to surround the valley, and tribal scouts reported at least 100 soldiers taking positions in the hills. Standing Bear called an emergency council as Emma arrived breathless with her father's documents. "Morrison is planning to attack tonight," she announced without preamble. "I overheard him talking with hired killers. This isn't about returning me to white society. It's about eliminating witnesses to his crimes." She spread her father's papers before the council, explaining each piece of evidence. The documentation painted a clear picture of Morrison's conspiracy with railroad companies to steal tribal lands through fabricated incidents and manufactured crises. "This proves Morrison murdered my parents," Emma concluded. "But more importantly, it shows he's been planning to provoke a war with your tribe to justify seizing this entire territory." White Elk studied the documents with particular attention, his weathered face troubled. Such serious accusations against a military officer. They would be difficult to prove in territorial courts. "The proof is right here," Emma insisted, pointing to her father's detailed records. Papers can be forged, White Elk replied carefully. Military tribunals would require more substantial evidence. Something in his tone made Emma's skin crawl. She caught Standing Bear's eye and saw her own suspicions reflected there. The council meeting continued past midnight, but no consensus emerged. Half the tribe wanted to use the documents to seek federal intervention. The other half insisted Morrison would never allow them to reach federal authorities alive. As the gathering dispersed, Emma lingered near the dying fire with Standing Bear and Morning Star. "Father Mar," Morning Star said quietly, "we cannot delay much longer. Morrison grows more dangerous with each passing hour." Standing Bear nodded grimly. "The girl has brought us the weapon we need, but weapons are useless without the opportunity to use them." Emma excused herself, but instead of entering Morning Star's lodge, she circled back through shadows. Her tracking skills, refined through 3 years of Lakota training, allowed her to move silently through the camp. She reached White Elk's lodge just as the old man emerged, carrying a small bundle. He moved carefully through darkness toward the camp's edge, and Emma followed at a safe distance. White Elk stopped at a predetermined location, a distinctive rock formation visible even in moonlight. He placed his bundle at the rock's base, then retreated toward camp. Emma waited until he disappeared and then crept forward to examine what he had left. Inside the bundle was birch bark covered with simple pictographs that could be read by anyone familiar with Plains Indian Sign Language. The message was brief but devastating. "Girl has white man's papers. Knows too much. Attack tomorrow night or lose everything." Emma's world collapsed. White Elk trusted elder-respected council member, the man who had helped nurse her back to health, was Morrison's informant. She stumbled back toward camp, her mind reeling. How long had he been betraying them? How many of Morrison's lucky guesses had actually been White Elk's intelligence reports? But as she processed the betrayal, a larger realization struck her. White Elk's message revealed that Morrison wasn't just planning to silence her, he was preparing something that required detailed information about tribal defenses and movements. Emma spent the rest of the night staring at the lodge ceiling, trying to reconcile the grandfather figure who had taught her traditional stories with the traitor, preparing to deliver his people to their enemies. When morning came, she decided to confront White Elk directly. Not to expose him publicly, that would cause too much disruption, but to understand his motivations and perhaps change his mind. She found him alone at the stream performing morning prayers. The old man looked up as she approached, and she saw no surprise in his eyes, only resignation. "You know," he said simply. "Now why?" Emma asked, her voice cracking with grief and bewilderment. White Elk was silent for a long moment, then spoke with the weight of impossible choices. "My grandson lives at the agency school. Morrison promised that if I helped him, the boy would receive proper education, medical care, a future in the white world. And if you refuse, the boy disappears. Morrison has made such threats before and children have vanished." Emma felt her anger dissolve into pity. White Elk wasn't evil. He was desperate, trying to save one child by betraying his entire people. "There has to be another way," she said. "Perhaps. But I am old and my fighting days are over. The boy is all I have left of my daughter." "What has Morrison promised you now?" White Elk's face crumpled with shame. "Safe passage for the women and children if the tribe surrenders without resistance. He says he only wants you that the others can return to the reservation unharmed." "You believe him?" "I want to believe him. What choice do I have?" Emma understood then that White Elk's betrayal wasn't malicious. It was the desperate act of a grandfather trying to protect his family. But understanding didn't make it less dangerous. "When is Morrison coming?" she asked. "Tonight. He plans to surround the camp and demand your surrender. If the tribe resists..." White Elk couldn't finish the sentence. Emma studied the old man's anguished face, then made a decision that surprised them both. "Come with me. I want to show you something." She led White Elk to her secret hiding place and showed him her father's complete documentation of Morrison's crimes. As the old man read, his face grew increasingly pale. do you see?" Emma asked gently. "Morrison has been planning this for months. Your grandson was probably already dead when Morrison first contacted you. Men like him don't leave witnesses, not even children." White Elk's hands trembled as he set down the papers. "What have I done? You tried to save someone you love, but now you have a chance to save everyone you love." "How?" Emma smiled grimly. "By helping me turn Morrison's plan against him." That afternoon, Emma met secretly with Red Hawk and his most trusted warriors. She spread out maps of the surrounding territory, combining her father's detailed surveys with the warriors' intimate knowledge of local terrain. "Morrison thinks he knows everything about our defenses because White Elk has been feeding him information," she explained. "But what if we gave White Elk false information to pass along?" Red Hawk's eyes gleamed with understanding. "You want to set a trap?" "Exactly. Morrison expects us to follow predictable patterns. What if we do something completely unexpected?" They spent hours planning using Emma's knowledge of military tactics, learned from her father, combined with traditional Lakota warfare strategies. The plan was audacious and dangerous, but it offered their only real chance of survival. As evening approached, Emma prepared for what might be her final battle. She had grown from a terrified child into a young woman capable of facing her parents' killer, but the cost of that transformation weighed heavily on her heart. Morning Star found her checking her weapons and supplies one last time. "Daughter," Morning Star said quietly, "you don't have to do this. We could try to find refuge with other tribes. Running won't stop Morrison. He'll keep hunting us until we're all dead." Emma met Morning Star's gaze steadily. "I won't let him destroy another family." "Then we fight together." Emma embraced the woman who had become her true mother. "I love you, Morning Star. Whatever happens tonight, remember that you saved me in every way that matters." As darkness fell, Emma took her position in the carefully planned ambush. Morrison's forces were already moving into the valley, exactly as White Elk's false intelligence had suggested they would. But instead of finding a sleeping camp full of vulnerable families, they would encounter prepared warriors fighting on ground of their own choosing. Emma checked her weapons one final time, her father's service revolver, a Lakota war axe, and the knife Morning Star had given her. Tonight would determine whether justice finally caught up with William Morrison, or whether his crimes would be buried along with everyone who knew about them. The first gunshots echoed across the valley like thunder, and Emma Harper, Little Wolf of the Lakota, went to war. Morrison's attack began precisely at midnight, with coordinated assaults from 3 directions designed to trap the tribe in their valley stronghold. But the Lakota were ready, having used White Elk's false intelligence to anticipate every move. Emma crouched behind carefully prepared earthworks, watching muzzle flashes light up the darkness like deadly fireflies. The sound of gunfire echoed off canyon walls, creating confusion about enemy positions and numbers. First phase complete. Red Hawk reported, sliding into the trench beside her. "Morrison's men are exactly where we expected." Through her father's field glasses, Emma could see Morrison himself directing the assault from a command position on the ridge. Even at distance, his scarred profile was unmistakable in the moonlight. "He's staying back," she observed. "Just like always, letting others do his dirty work." "Not for long." Red Hawk grinned fiercely. "Wait until he realizes his easy victory has become a death trap." The battle's second phase began when Lakota warriors emerged from concealed positions behind Morrison's forces. Suddenly, the attackers found themselves caught between defensive positions and mobile strike teams who knew every rock and gully in the territory. Morrison's confident assault dissolved into chaos as his numerical advantage became meaningless in the broken terrain. His men were fighting individually instead of as coordinated units, while the Lakota moved like shadows through landscape they had known since childhood. Emma watched Morrison's command post through her field glasses, waiting for the moment when desperation would force him to abandon safety and enter the battle personally. Men like Morrison couldn't accept defeat. Their arrogance would drive them to increasingly reckless actions. "Right there," she whispered, seeing Morrison mount his horse and ride toward the heaviest fighting. "He's taking the bait." She left her position and began moving toward the predetermined intercept point, using her father's surveying knowledge and 3 years of Lakota training to navigate the treacherous terrain in darkness. The sounds of battle grew louder as she approached the narrow canyon where Morrison would have to pass if he followed the only route that offered cover from Lakota marksmen. Emma reached the ambush point and settled behind a boulder to wait, her heart hammering against her ribs. Morrison appeared exactly where she expected, leading a dozen men through the canyon passage. His face was twisted with rage as he realized his carefully planned massacre had become a nightmare of military embarrassment. Emma stepped out from concealment, her father's revolver trained on Morrison's chest. "Hello, Uncle William," she said quietly, using the name she had called him as a child. Morrison's horse reared as he pulled hard on the reins, his eyes wide with shock at seeing Emma Harper alive and armed. Behind him, his men reached for weapons, but froze when Lakota warriors emerged from shadows on both sides of the canyon. "Emma," Morrison said, recovering his composure with practiced ease. "Thank God you're alive. I've been searching for you ever since your parents, since you murdered them." Emma interrupted, her voice steady despite the emotions churning inside her. "I remember everything now, William. Your face, your voice, the way you moved through our house like you owned it." Morrison's scarred face hardened. "You were 10 years old and traumatized. You can't possibly remember accurately. I remember you sitting at our dinner table asking Papa about his surveying work. I remember you pretending to be his friend while planning to kill him." Emma's grip tightened on her weapon. "I also found Papa's documents, all of them." For the first time, the Morrison showed genuine fear. "Whatever you think you found, maps showing your illegal land deals, correspondence with railroad executives, detailed records of bribes, and falsified reports." Emma continued, never letting her aim waver. "Papa documented everything, including how you threatened him when he said he'd report you to federal authorities." Morrison's hand moved slowly toward his holster. Even if such documents existed, who would believe the word of a savage-raised white girl against a decorated military officer? Colonel Bradley at Fort Robinson believed them, Emma said, watching Morrison's face go pale. "I sent copies to him weeks ago through trusted traders. Federal marshals are probably arresting your co-conspirators right now." Morrison's composure cracked completely. "You little witch, you've destroyed everything I built." He drew his pistol with desperate speed, but Emma was ready. Her father's training and 3 years of survival among the Lakota had honed her reflexes to razor sharpness. Her shot took Morrison in the shoulder, spinning him from his saddle as his own bullet went wide. Morrison hit the ground hard, his weapon flying into the darkness. Emma approached cautiously, keeping her revolver trained on the man who had haunted her nightmares for 3 years. "You killed my parents for money," she said, her voice carrying all the pain and rage of a murdered childhood. "You would have killed an entire tribe for railroad profits." Morrison struggled to sit up, blood soaking his blue uniform. "The railroad brings civilization to this wasteland. Progress requires sacrifice, whose sacrifice you never risked anything except other people's lives." "I risked everything," Morrison snarled. "My career, my reputation, my future, all to tame this wilderness and build something lasting." "You built an empire on graves," Emma replied. "Papa was right about you. You're not a builder, you're a destroyer." Morrison laughed bitterly. "Your precious Papa was a fool who couldn't see the bigger picture. This territory will be developed whether idealists like him approve or not. I just made sure the right people profited from inevitable progress." Emma felt a strange calmness settle over her as she looked down at her parents' killer. The fear and hatred that had driven her for 3 years were transforming into something else, Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding that Morrison was ultimately a small, weak man whose crimes had grown from cowardice rather than strength. The right people, she repeated. People like you. People with vision and courage to take what they want. People who murdered children's parents and call it progress. Morrison tried to reach for a hidden knife, but Red Hawk's boot pinned his arm to the ground. Enough talk, the young warrior said grimly. This man has earned death many times over. Emma looked around the canyon at the Lakota fighters who had become her brothers, then at Morrison bleeding in the dirt. Justice demanded his life, but something deeper demanded more. No, she said quietly. He doesn't get to die a warrior's death in battle. He goes back to face trial for his crimes. Emma, he's too dangerous to keep alive. Red Hawk protested. Men like this always escape justice. Not this time. I have evidence that will convict him in any honest court. Emma kept her weapon trained on Morrison while addressing his surviving men. You have two choices: surrender now and testify against Morrison, or die here defending a man who would sacrifice you to save himself. The hired guns looked at each other uncertainly. They had been promised easy money for a simple massacre, not a pitched battle against experienced warriors in hostile territory. How do we know you'll keep your word? One of them asked. Because I'm not him, Emma replied simply. One by one, Morrison's men threw down their weapons. The tide of battle had turned completely. Morrison's grand conspiracy was collapsing into ignominious surrender. As dawn broke over the canyon, Emma stood over the man who had destroyed her childhood and nearly destroyed her adopted family. William Morrison, architect of murder and theft, sat in the dirt with his hands bound, his scarred face pale with blood loss, and the realization of his complete defeat. It's over, Emma said more to herself than to him. Morrison looked up at her with eyes full of hatred and disbelief. You think this ends anything? There are others who will finish what I started. The railroad will get this land one way or another. Maybe. But they'll have to find another way to steal it. Emma turned away from Morrison and looked out over the valley where her Lakota family had made their stand. Smoke rose from scattered fires, and she could hear the voices of warriors calling to each other as they secured the battlefield. Standing Bear approached his weathered face, showing exhaustion but also fierce pride. It is finished, little wolf, he said in Lakota. The enemy is defeated. This enemy, Emma replied. But others will come, and we will face them together, as we always have. Emma nodded, feeling the truth of those words in her bones. She had begun this journey as a terrified child fleeing her parents' killers. She was ending it as a bridge between two worlds, carrying the strength of both cultures in her heart. The sun climbed higher, burning away the shadows of night and revealing the full scope of their victory. Morrison's surviving men were being escorted toward the reservation agency, where federal authorities would take custody of them. Morrison himself would be transported to territorial headquarters to face trial for murder conspiracy and treason. But for Emma, the real victory wasn't Morrison's capture. It was the knowledge that her two families, birth and adopted, had finally received justice. White Elk approached hesitantly, his aged face heavy with shame and sorrow. Little wolf, he said quietly, I have no right to ask, but you don't need to ask. Emma interrupted gently. Your grandson died of fever at the agency school 2 months ago. Morrison lied to you from the beginning. The old man's knees buckled and Red Hawk caught him before he could fall. I am responsible for the deaths of our warriors, White Elk whispered. How can I live with such knowledge? Emma knelt beside the broken elder, remembering her own struggles with guilt and responsibility. You tried to save someone you loved, she said softly. That's not a crime. It's what makes us human. Morrison was the one who chose murder and betrayal. You were just trying to protect family. But the harm I caused can be repaired if you choose to spend your remaining years serving your people instead of drowning in regret. White Elk looked up at her with tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. You would forgive such betrayal. I would forgive a grandfather's love for his grandson. The rest is between you and the spirits. Standing Bear placed his hand on White Elk's shoulder. Our brother has been deceived by a master of lies. His heart was never truly turned against his people. Emma stood and looked around at the faces of her Lakota family, Standing Bear's wisdom, Morning Star's fierce love, Red Hawk's courage, even White Elk's desperate devotion to family. These people had saved her, shaped her, and given her the strength to face her deepest fears. I need to go with Morrison to the territorial capital, she announced. My testimony will be required for his trial. And after the trial, Morning Star asked, though her eyes already knew the answer. I come home, Emma said simply. This is where I belong. The journey to the territorial capital took 6 days, with Emma riding alongside the wagon that transported Morrison and his surviving conspirators. Federal marshals had indeed arrested railroad executives and territorial officials based on her father's evidence, validating her decision to trust Colonel Bradley with the truth. Morrison remained largely silent during the journey, though occasionally Emma caught him staring at her with mixture of hatred and grudging respect. You realize, he said on the final day, that you've accomplished nothing permanent. Men like me will always find ways to take what we want from people like your savages. People like Standing Bear have survived worse than people like you. Emma replied calmly. They'll survive whatever comes next. And you? What happens to the little girl who thinks she can play with both worlds? Emma considered the question seriously. I become someone who belongs to both worlds. Someone who can help them understand each other instead of destroying each other. Morrison laughed bitterly. Naive child, understanding is a luxury. Survival requires choosing sides. I've chosen my side. I chose family over profit love, over power justice, over convenience. The question is what you'll choose when you're standing before a judge. Morrison's trial became a sensation throughout the Dakota Territory. Emma's testimony, supported by her father's meticulous documentation, painted a comprehensive picture of corruption that reached from local officials to railroad executives in distant cities. The prosecution presented evidence of illegal land transfers, falsified military reports, bribery of government officials, and ultimately the murder of John and Sarah Harper to conceal these crimes. Emma's eyewitness account of the massacre, combined with physical evidence and corroborating testimony from Morrison's captured men, left no doubt about his guilt. Morrison's defense attorney argued that his client was a decorated military officer who had served his country with distinction, that the evidence against him was fabricated by hostile Indians seeking revenge for legitimate military actions. But the prosecution's case was overwhelming, and Morrison's own arrogance worked against him. When given the opportunity to address the court before sentencing, Morrison showed no remorse. I regret nothing, he declared. Every action I took was in service of bringing civilization to this wilderness. History will vindicate me when this territory becomes a prosperous part of our great nation. Judge Harrison, a stern man with 30 years of frontier experience, was not impressed. Major Morrison, he said, you have been convicted of conspiracy, fraud, and murder in the first degree. Your actions brought shame to the military uniform you wore and betrayed the trust placed in you by your government and your fellow citizens. This court sentences you to death by hanging sentence to be carried out within 30 days. Emma felt no satisfaction in hearing Morrison's death sentence. Justice had been served, but it couldn't restore her parents' lives or undo the years of fear and displacement she had endured. After the trial, Colonel Bradley approached her in the courthouse corridor. Miss Harper, he said respectfully, I want you to know that your father would be proud of your courage. Without your evidence, Morrison and his co-conspirators would never have faced justice. Thank you, Colonel. What happens now to the land Morrison was trying to steal Federal investigators are reviewing all transactions connected to his conspiracy. Any illegal transfers will be voided, and the affected territories will be returned to their rightful owners. Emma nodded, understanding that this meant the Lakota would retain their traditional hunting grounds and sacred sites. It was more than she had dared hope for when she first made the decision to trust white man's justice. Will there be compensation for the tribes who suffered under Morrison's policies? Colonel Bradley's expression grew troubled. That's more complicated. The territorial government is reluctant to admit the scope of Morrison's crimes, and railroad interests still have significant political influence. In other words, justice has limits. I'm afraid so. But what you've accomplished here will make it much more difficult for other men like Morrison to commit similar crimes. Emma accepted this partial victory, understanding that complete justice was rarely possible in an imperfect world. What mattered was that Morrison's specific crimes had been exposed and punished, and future conspiracies would face greater scrutiny. 3 weeks later, Emma stood in the crowd that gathered to witness Morrison's execution. She had debated whether to attend, ultimately deciding that she owed it to her parents' memory to see their killer face final justice. Morrison mounted the scaffold with his characteristic arrogance intact. When asked if he had any final words, he looked directly at Emma in the crowd. "I die knowing that everything I built will outlast everything you think you've accomplished," he said. Progress is inevitable, and progress has no conscience. The hangman's rope ended William Morrison's life and his crimes. But his final words echoed in Emma's mind as she prepared to return to her Lakota family. He was right that progress was inevitable, but wrong about what form that progress would take. Emma returned to the Lakota camp in late summer 1875, just as the tribe was preparing for the autumn hunt. Her arrival sparked a celebration that lasted 3 days, with traditional dances, storytelling, and feasting that honored her courage and determination. Standing Bear formally adopted her in a ceremony that made her legal status as his daughter official under both Lakota tradition and territorial law. Morning Star presented her with a new name to mark her transition from child to adult. Brave Heart Woman Who Walks Between Worlds. Red Hawk, now recovered from his battle wounds, had become the tribe's war leader. He approached Emma during the celebration with a proposal that surprised her. "Sister," he said formally, "the tribal council has discussed your unique position between our world and the white world. We believe you could serve as our voice in negotiations with territorial authorities." Emma considered this carefully. "You want me to become a translator?" "More than that. An advocate, a bridge builder, someone who understands both cultures well enough to help them find common ground." That's a heavy responsibility. Heavy responsibilities require strong shoulders. You've proven yours are strong enough. Emma accepted the role, understanding that it would define the rest of her life. She would become a mediator between cultures, helping her Lakota family navigate an increasingly complex relationship with white settlement, while working to prevent future conflicts like the one that had nearly destroyed them. Over the following years, Emma's unique position made her invaluable to both communities. She helped negotiate fair trades between Lakota hunters, and white merchants mediated disputes over land use and water rights, and served as interpreter during official meetings with territorial authorities. Her work wasn't always successful, and she faced suspicion from extremists on both sides who viewed her as a traitor to their respective causes. But gradually, her patience and dedication built trust with reasonable people from both cultures. In 1880, Emma used her inheritance from her parents' estate to establish a school that served both Lakota and white children. The one-room building sat on neutral ground between the reservation and the growing town of Pine Ridge, symbolizing her commitment to building bridges rather than walls. The school's curriculum combined traditional academic subjects with practical skills like farming, hunting, and survival techniques. Lakota children learned English and arithmetic, while white children learned Lakota stories and traditional crafts. Most importantly, children from both cultures learn to see each other as individuals rather than representatives of opposing groups. Emma's teaching philosophy emphasized understanding over judgment, cooperation over competition, and respect for all forms of knowledge. Her students went on to become leaders in their respective communities, carrying forward the lessons of tolerance and mutual respect they had learned in her classroom. By 1882, Emma Harper, now known as Braveheart Woman Who Walks Between Worlds, had become a respected figure throughout the Dakota Territory. Her school had graduated over 100 students, her mediation work had prevented numerous conflicts, and her advocacy had helped secure legal protections for Lakota land rights. But her greatest achievement was personal rather than political. She had created a life that honored both her birth heritage and her adopted culture, proving that identity could be chosen rather than simply inherited. On a crisp autumn morning in 1882, Emma stood in her schoolhouse preparing lessons for the day. At 20 years old, she had grown into a confident woman who moved easily between worlds that most people considered incompatible. Her blonde hair was braided with traditional Lakota ornaments, and she wore a dress that combined practical frontier clothing with Native American beadwork. The outfit symbolized her refusal to choose between her two identities. She was both Emma Harper and Braveheart Woman, both white and Lakota, both individual and community member. A soft knock at the schoolhouse door interrupted her preparations. Morning Star entered carrying a small bundle wrapped in soft deerskin. "Daughter," she said using the English word that had become natural between them, "I have someone for you to meet." Emma opened the bundle to reveal a tiny Lakota girl, perhaps 2 years old, with dark hair and solemn brown eyes that held too much sadness for such a young face. Her parents died in the influenza outbreak at the agency. Morning Star explained gently. "She has no other family." Emma lifted the child carefully, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility and love that had defined her life since Standing Bear first carried her from the frozen wilderness 8 years earlier. "What's her name?" Emma asked. "She has no Lakota name yet. That honor belongs to whoever becomes her family." Emma studied the little girl's face, seeing her own childhood fears reflected in those dark eyes. This child needed what Emma had found: a family that chose love over convenience, protection over profit, hope over despair. "Little Star," Emma whispered the name coming to her like a gift. "Her name is Little Star." As if summoned by the moment, familiar faces appeared at the schoolhouse windows. Standing Bear, now in his 70s, but still dignified and strong. Red Hawk with his wife and children. White Elk, who had spent his remaining years serving his people with humble dedication. Even Gray Fox and Swift Arrow warriors who had become Emma's brothers in every way that mattered. Emma's Lakota family had come to witness this moment, understanding that it represented more than one woman adopting one child. It symbolized the continuation of their chosen family tradition, and the belief that love creates bonds stronger than blood, that courage can overcome any loss, and that hope can survive any tragedy. "Some families are born," Emma said softly to Little Star, echoing Morning Star's words from years past. "Others are chosen, but love makes them all true." Outside, the sounds of children arriving for school filled the morning air. Lakota voices mixing with English laughter, transcending cultural boundaries, the future taking shape through the innocent interactions of the next generation. Emma Harper had lost her birth family to greed and violence, but she had found something more precious in return: a chosen family that embraced differences, a community that valued understanding over conquest, and a purpose that transformed personal tragedy into public service. As she prepared to begin another day of teaching, Little Star, secure in her arms, and her Lakota family surrounding her with love, Emma understood that her father's dream of justice had been fulfilled in ways he never could have imagined. The man who had murdered him was dead, his crimes exposed and punished. But more importantly, his daughter had used the evidence of those crimes to build something better: a bridge between worlds, a school for peace, a family that chose love over hatred. The morning sun streamed through the schoolhouse windows, illuminating maps and books, children's drawings, and traditional crafts, the tools of education that would shape the territory's future. Emma Harper, brave heart woman who walks between worlds, was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. In the distance, the rolling plains stretched endlessly toward the horizon. No longer a wilderness to be conquered, but a homeland to be shared, protected and passed on to the children who would inherit its promise. Emma's story had begun with violence and loss, but it ended with hope and healing proof that even the darkest chapters could lead to the brightest conclusions. The school bell rang, calling children from both cultures to learn together. And Emma Harper smiled as she prepared to teach another generation that understanding was possible, that hatred was not inevitable, and that the future belonged to those brave enough to build bridges instead of walls. Her parents' legacy lived on, not in the land Morrison had tried to steal, but in the hearts and minds of the children who would carry forward the lessons of justice, courage, and love that had defined one remarkable woman's journey from orphan child to bridge between worlds.